I don't think we're going to have any crossovers.
No, because you left so many good games off the list for arbitrary reasons. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Flipside. I'm Sam.
I'm JT.
And this is our top 5 variable player power games. And we just had a bottom 5 list. That's our numbers 10 through 6 over on the Dice Tower. If you've joined us from over there, thank you for coming on over. We appreciate that. As I said before, I have not done my weights properly. So I'll be putting them up here on the screens again, as I did in the last one, just because we talk about the average weight of the games. Out of 5, what was your... Since I didn't have mine, I'm going to put mine right up here.
My average weight was 3.24.
3.24. Jeez. It's in the upper half of the weight spectrum.
My 2 lowest ones, actually my 3 lowest ones were in this last half. I also left out a lot of games.
Boy, did he.
For various reasons.
We're probably not going to have various bad reasons. We're probably not going to... Well, hello.
Sorry about that.
So we're probably not going to have any crossover because of bad choices. I think maybe we might have one. Maybe.
Nope, I didn't put Gaia Project on there on accident.
That was not
I forgot
going to
to
be
put
a
Gaia
crossover.
Project on there. I'm sorry. I forgot. And then I didn't put any games on here where, well, there's a caveat. There's one exception to this rule. But I didn't put games on here where you're just picking a player character and playing through a dungeon or a dungeon crawl.
Wait a minute, you said there's one exception?
Yeah, there is, because
Has
it's
it already showed up?
Because it's not a dungeon crawl type of game. It has not showed up. And it's not one you're going to pick.
So many missed opportunities.
But there was no shortage of games to pick from.
That is true. That is very true. All right, well, without further ado, let's hit it. All right, my number 5 is a game that is not a dungeon crawler.
Woohoo!
But you do pick a team of characters.
Okay, I'm listening.
And your team battles against the other players or the other 3 players. It's a 2 or 4 player game. It's not 3. It's a 2 or 4. It's best as 2. But it can be played with 4, so that's why I included it. If you watch the other list, you know that I did not include strictly 2-player games. Because it's obviously I have my abilities, you have your abilities.
Either. Yep.
Anyway, this one is called Super Fantasy Brawl. Because it is absolutely variable player powers. So much so that your team synergy is really what you're trying to construct before the game, because you're trying to pick 3 different players who have each 3 different sets of cards or abilities that you're going to shuffle into one deck. And that's going to be how the team that you take against my team that's composed the same way. So the variable player powers here is almost like 3-fold, because you're picking different abilities that are going to make up your team.
I completely agree with you here.
Cool.
I mean, you are creating that variable power right there.
Yes.
So that's awesome. That deck is
from
awesome.
the beginning of the game.
Yep.
And that's one of the caveats that I put into it, is that you needed to have it from the very beginning of the game. Now, some people might be asking me, and this is a little bit of overshadowing, but it's okay because I'm going to talk about it right here. The reason I picked Super Fantasy Brawl over Warhammer Underworlds, Shadespire, Night Vault, Dire Chasm, whatever set that you have, is because this one is more accessible to a greater number of people. You could easily put that in here if you're talking about a different audience, I guess you could say. But Super Fantasy Brawl, I think, definitely stands on its own. Between the two, again, kind of like my 10 and the last list, it really just depends upon what mood I'm in.
You don't think Super Fantasy Brawl is more streamlined and a little cleaner in the rules?
It absolutely is.
I mean, it is. It's a lot
absolutely
cleaner.
Is. That's one of the reasons why it's a little bit more accessible. Warhammer Underworlds has got Games Workshop writing the rules. It's kind of written for a different audience.
Yep.
Super Fantasy Brawl was much more palatable to a wider group, I think. So that's my number 5, Super Fantasy Brawl.
I really like that pick. I really like that.
Thank you very much. Aw.
My number 5 is a card game where you're going to go with your friends or whatever else you're going to do, and you're going to go against some super villain. And it's a game called Marvel Champions. In Marvel Champions, you have a lot of different characters you can play.
Is this your exception to the rule?
No, it is not, because it's not a dungeon crawl. Like this is a full blown tableau,
sure,
and card game in the middle of that. But all of the characters are very different, and mixing those characters with the different types of decks, protection decks, and aggression decks, etc., makes what you start with completely different than what your other players start with. And it also gives you the ability to kind of synergize together and kind of work on different avenues and do what your character's good at while the other people are doing what their character's good at. But you definitely have a completely different feel to your deck. And different ways to use it. Marvel Champions has a really cool system where you can help the other player on their turn too by spending cards for their resources and different things and helping them out. So that's pretty cool the way that works. But
very good.
My number 5, Marvel Champions, fantastic game.
Cool.
From start to finish.
Cool. All right, my number 4 is a card game. And it is a game in which you have the game includes a bunch of faction decks, and you can pick 2 of those faction decks and smash them together.
Oh.
It's called Smash Up. This is super fun, variable player power in a box, because you get to choose how weird or how awesome or how off the wall your super player power is by mixing those 2 decks together, because each deck carries with it its own set of abilities and specialties. You put those 2 together and now you have a brand new set of how those 2 abilities synergize together. It's a really fun game. All you're really doing is you're trying to control different bases that are out on the board, kind of like in a market, if you want to call it that. But you're playing characters down onto those different bases. And once the level of power from all of the characters that are at that base reach the number that's on the base's card, then whoever has the most power gets that many points. Whoever has second most gets that many points, and so forth and so on. So you're only playing the game until somebody gets 15 points, I think. But how you're going about doing that and the different things that you can do with your deck is completely different from everybody else in the game. It's just a really fun game, and I've really enjoyed Smash Up for a very long time. But had to include it on this one. That's my number 4, Smash Up.
Very, very nice. All right, my number 4 is the one that breaks my rule just a little bit.
Kind of like the last one did.
No, how can a deck of cards break my rule? There's no character.
You picked a character.
No, there's no character in that. But my number 4 breaks the rules a little bit in all of that, and this is the Reckoners. Now, in the Reckoners, there's no dungeon crawl. There's no depth and moving around a board or any of that kind of thing. You're going location to location to location, and you're fighting these epics. The cool thing about the variable player powers in the Reckoners is, when you get your when you get your character card, they have abilities that are very much tailored to them and are very, very important to be used in the game. And you start out, and it's a dice game, so you start out with a different set of dice. And you might be better at getting money, or you might be better at taking out the troopers or whatever else, but it's very important to use those different sets. But your starting character with the dice and your specific power are completely different. And throughout the game of defeating these epics and fighting Steelheart or whoever the main boss is at the time, are very, very different. You're still doing the same kind of things, but you're definitely specialized in what you do and how you start.
It's a super hard game, in my opinion. He says he's never won. I've never lost.
I don't think I have. But I am playing on the hardest difficulty either. But this is a great game. No, I think I've lost. No, I don't think I've said I've never lost.
80% of the time.
Yeah, like 80% or 75% I win. So, but it's a great game.
Something else. All right, my number 3 should absolutely be a crossover, just like my number 7 should have absolutely been a crossover.
Oh no!
Just like my number 2 should absolutely be a crossover.
My
but
goodness gracious.
anyway, my number 3 is a game that I've only played once. Now, I've played its predecessor once as well. This version of the game, this part 2, so to speak, or second edition, is every bit better than its predecessor. I'm talking about Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape. Now, this one, you just don't have special abilities that you're doing. You play the game differently than everybody else at the table based on what character you have. And yeah, it's just a dungeon crawl, and yeah, you're just picking a character.
I almost put this one on my list. I almost put this one on my list because it does veer enough that
it's super. I mean, you're not just picking a character.
You have your own little mini game.
You're picking how you're going to play the game, not just a character.
Sure.
And to me, that is supremely what variable player powers should be. That should be almost like a definition.
Yeah.
And I've only played it once, but after playing it once, I couldn't leave it off of this list.
Couldn't unplay it.
I could not. I could not. This is a great variable player power game.
Very much so.
Such a great design. So much better than Massive Darkness 1. I could not leave it off the list. That is my number 3, Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape.
Now, what was your number 4?
Smash Up.
Oh, I was going to tell you, your top 5's on fire. All right, anyways, my number 3, you couldn't get factions that are more variable than in this game. And maybe this is an easy way for me to not put too many bones in here, because it's still a chip theory game. And this is Cloud Spire.
Yeah, okay.
In Cloud Spire, you are doing a MOBA kind of lane battler.
Yep.
Your faction is completely different. Your units are completely different. Your base and the way that you upgrade is completely different than everybody else's. And that's the hard entry point to Cloud Spire, because they're so different. You have to know a lot of stuff, not only for your faction, but whoever you're fighting or whatever else. And that becomes, it's quite a lot of information.
Yep.
But you are completely different. Your faction is completely different to the way they move, to the way they fly, to the, if you have flyers or whatever else, or the way they spawn. There's a lot of difference there. This is an amazing, amazing game. I wish I could play this game like every day, but it's a lot of work to get her going and to think about it. But this is a great game.
I've never played.
It's so freaking cool, man.
I was
so cool.
super. The artwork pulled me in.
It's really
theme
neat.
pulled me in, and then I found out chip theory, poker chip thingies.
Oh, I love them.
And then I saw. I think this is a heavy game too.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Like not like weight. Like
it's weight heavy.
It's complexity heavy.
I can't get the box out of the couch.
It's also weight heavy too. Yeah. But so I haven't played it yet. I'd love to play it though.
We need to play this. We need to play it. So the way I top Nell this is we played solo. So we played our side against the computer, because there's solo scenarios, there's cooperative scenarios, and then obviously there's competitive lane battling.
Right.
So, and it really helps to learn that way in a solo scenario where you're kind of just chatting through things and making stuff happen. So it's really cool. But
cool.
Cloud Spire is my number 3. Love it.
Sweet. Maybe you just haven't played this game enough. I think it's probably too light of a game to be on your list, frankly. But this is a game where you're going to be able to... first of all, there are 5 races that you can pick from to be your race at the beginning of the game. And as people pick through those races, new races are generated by having a character trait and then a race.
I haven't played this game enough.
Maybe.
I
don't know.
It was on my list. It got pushed. It ended up like 11 or 12.
Small World
It did.
is what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Small World is what he's talking about. And this again, it's kind of just like with Massive Darkness 2. except you're not just going to use one variable player power throughout the course of the game. You're probably going to use 2, 3, maybe even 4 as the course goes on, because as your race spreads out, you're going to put that race into decline and then pick another one. And frankly, how these races work is completely different, generally speaking, than how other races are going to work.
100%.
And so you're really choosing how you're going to play the game. You're choosing what strategy you're going to now employ in the game. And I think it is, again, one of those games that just kind of defines variable player power for us in the hobby. And the closer games get to something like this, the more fun I have with them, because I want to be different than everybody else at the table.
Yep.
And that's exactly what Small World does. That's exactly what Massive Darkness 2 does. And it is just an amazing experience. And it handles all of that in a fairly light, easily accessible game. That's my number 2, Small World.
That's a fantastic pick. Your top 5 really is on fire.
On fire.
On fire. I like it. All right, my number 2 is a little game. Not that little.
It comes in 4 boxes that each weigh 30 pounds.
From a Porta Games called Revive. And in Revive, you each start with your starting faction, and those starting factions have different abilities and different... they have different abilities that they use throughout the game. When you're pulling and when you're using certain cards, they do different things. And the factions are very different. They're very cool. Their abilities can be very instrumental in the way you play or how you want to play. And they're very instrumental in your strategy. So this game, I know, is a heavier game as far as everything that's going on and the upgrading and the tech tree and all of that kind of stuff. But the way that the factions work in this, I just when you said variable player powers, this is the one I thought of because I really like the impact that those have throughout the game.
Yep.
They're not super flashy, but they do have a lot of impact.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. It doesn't have to be flashy. Just impact. How they affect the game. That's more important to me.
Yep.
My number 1 used to be in my top 10 games of all time. And it has slipped considerably because I just can't get it to the table as much as I want to. Still in my top 100, but it fell considerably. But when we're talking about variable player powers, Twilight Imperium 4th edition, it just doesn't really get much better. It really doesn't. You not only have your own starting units that are different than everybody else. Some of those units can do things that nobody else can do. You have your own planets that you are able to start on, and that's different than what everybody else can do. The tech tree that you can, there aren't restrictions based upon your race, but there are definite bonuses that if you play, if you kind of play to your race's abilities and follow those tech trees, you can get a lot more powerful very quickly by following that tech tree. So how you interact with the tech trees is different. How you interact on the board is different. There's also personal goals that you're going to have. That's not really part of the variable player power, but it adds to that difference from everybody else.
Sure.
I've got a couple of goals that are different than the other goals that everybody else has, and those kind of reveal over the course of time. This is, I wish it wasn't so hard to get to the table because it really is variable player powers at its finest, in my opinion. That's my number 1, Twilight Imperium 4th edition.
Yep, I have to say your top 5 on fire from top to bottom.
Yes!
Awesome top 5. All right, my number 1 is a
Probably
game.
another game I haven't played.
It was funny because when I told Mel variable player powers, and she said, "What's on your list?" Because she always says, "What's on your list?" before I walk out the door.
Yeah.
She said this one first, and it's one of the first ones I thought of too, and that's Spirit Island.
I knew this was going to be on your list.
This is one of those ones
I know.
that is so different.
Yeah.
Every one of the spirits is so different. The way that you get your powers, the way you spread across the board, all of the different individual powers that you have, the types of resources, not resources, like if you use sun or moon or whatever else, the types of card, I guess, icons that you use to fuel your powers are completely different. Your starting hands are completely different. The way you build your characters out are completely different. And the fact that one of you could be the ocean and you have to play from the waterfront all the time, or if you're a volcano, you got to play from the mountains all the time, or whatever else. These factions are so completely different. The spirits are so completely different. And they are amazing. I just love, this is the epitome of variable player power.
I agree.
In its finest, or in one of its finest forms. But this was a really easy list to do.
Yeah.
You could have easily put 100 games in this top 10, and they would all be valid because it's so
My
it's so
10th
good.
group of 10.
That's right. I really like variable player powers.
I do
think
too.
when we did our top 100 last year, when I went through and did those stats, like 75 or 80% of our games had variable player powers in them.
That makes sense.
So
it makes absolute sense. Now, some of you might be questioning my sanity at this point because you might be asking me, where's Blood Rage? Well, Blood Rage is my favorite game of all time. But my thing with this list was I wanted games that you start the game with variable player powers. You start the game being different than everybody else. And really that first age in Blood Rage, you're very similar. Yeah. Your differences are so minute in that first age. So I left Blood Rage off of the list because you don't start the game with differences. You have to build the differences as the game goes on. It's a hair to split on, I get it, but it was a significant hair for me.
I think that's a good one. I think that's a good call. Really good call.
I want to mention some other games. Tannhäuser. Tannhäuser is another one, but it's more of it kind of simulates a first-person shooter game, and you're picking a character, so it probably doesn't pass your test.
Sure.
But I think it does. The reason I left it off is because it's not incredibly accessible, and if you do find copies of it, it's usually somebody selling it on eBay, and you're going to pay through the nose for it. So I didn't really want to put it out there, but if you have the chance to get a hold of that one, it's a really good game, and it would be worth it to an extent. Already talked about Warhammer Underworlds, Northgard Uncharted Lands. I left that off because the differences is very small.
Minute. Yeah,
very
but they're
small.
still there.
Zombicide Undead or Alive. I really thought hard about putting that one on there.
Sure.
Because of the extra differences of what kind of character you are.
Yeah, which makes it a little bit different than the rest of them. I think Marvel Zombies start out the most different. Your characters start out with kind of all of their abilities right off the bat, like full abilities right off the bat. You just have to manage them. I put on here 51st State. If you like Imperial Settlers, 51st State is a great one because you have those factions are very different in the way they want to play.
Yeah.
Rift Force is a really good game. And then Mythic Mischief I put on here as well. It is a two-player game, and I didn't put any two-player games on here for the same reason.
Yep.
But there's a ton of different factions in Mythic Mischief, and they just have different types of movement, different types of adjusting and modifying the board. And every faction does it differently, so it's pretty cool.
Star Wars Rebellion is another one that I left off.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's really a two-player game that just has ways that you can play 3 and 4 players on it, but it's really meant to be a two-player game, in my opinion. So that's the main reason I left it off, because the differences are it's my side versus your side. So those are the main ones. We talked about the unmatched game system being kind of equal with Marvel Dice Throne, and then Warhammer Underworlds being equal with Super Fantasy Brawl on the other ones. That's it. That is our top 5, top 10, if you've watched the bottom
Yep.
5 over on the Dice Tower, variable player power games. And the cool thing about this, of not having any crossovers, here are 20 games
Fantastic games.
that are stellar
Yep.
variable player power games that you guys can go check out.
Add a whole bunch more down in the comments.
Exactly.
I wanna
Let
hear
us
'em.
know.
So,
Let us
yeah.
know what games we missed, what games are your faves, and we will interact with you down there in the comments section. Thanks for joining us. See you guys and gals on the flip side. Take care.
See you later.